Welcome, everybody. And thank you for spending your beautiful summer Saturday morning with us. South Asian Americans are one of the fastest growing groups in the US today. And so during the month of May, which is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, we had planned this event, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, we had to postpone it to June. But we don't need a specific month to celebrate what heritage we bring here. So here we are. I would like to start by acknowledging that this event is being organized by SAARI, so SAARI, which stands for South Asians Against Racial Injustice, which is an initiative that was started by India Association of Minnesota in collaboration with other South Asian partner organizations in Twin Cities. So IAM was formed in 1970s to represent Asian Indian diaspora to the broader society in Minnesota and to build a strong and cohesive community of Asian Indians. So its mission includes 3 C's of charity, culture, and connections. For more information about IAM goals and work done, and to see the videos of our previous events, please visit our website, iamn.org. And a video of this event will also be posted on that website. Here I was going to welcome Dr. Sharmila Sen, the author of the book, and she will be joining us. Until then, let me start by giving a short description of the book. In 1982, at the age of 12, Sharmila immigrated from India to the US. And like all of us everywhere, wherever she went, she was asked to self-report her race. So on INS forms, at the doctor's office, in the school. So before she came, she never identified with any race as such in India when she was a child. And here she spent much of her life attempting to blend into the American whiteness. And the descriptions that she gives of these incidences are so accurate. And many immigrants who came to this country in either 1980s or 90s definitely identify with what she has described in the book. So after her teen years, as she was trying to assimilate, she was forced to reckon with the hard questions, like what does it mean to be white? Or why does whiteness retain that magic cloak of invisibility while other colors are made hyper visible? And what it means to be white when we look at what it means to be American. So this is like part memoir, part manifesto, and it is really witty and a very honest story of discovering that this not whiteness can be the very thing that makes us American. So this is a brief summary. And those who have read the book, do you want to talk a little bit about what was something in the book that really connected with you or that made it interesting for you?
I can go first, having just read the book. Usually my memory is bad, but since I just read, one thing that stood out for me was the contrast or the reminder of the differences between an immigrant and an immigrant. So, back in the days growing up, learning English language and all of those good things. Yeah, I learned about those two words, immigrant, someone who is obviously moving away from one country, and immigrant, someone who is moving into another country. And over the decades, I completely forgot about the word immigrant. And the author, calls those two words out in a very interesting fashion. And that snippet stood out for me and reminded me that, yes, I'm an immigrant from India and an immigrant to the United States.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. She defines that very well early on. Anybody else? So Avni just joined us. Avni, just so that you know, the author is still going to join us. So we have just started with going through the summary of the book, and people who have read the book are sharing some thoughts about what they found in the book or how they connected with it. So just so that you know.
Thank you, Siley. Looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I will. I know Siley very well. She was the one who recommended this book to me. I think early on actually page 6 of the book, the author talks about how odd everything is in America, where we mix geographic with Asians, linguistic with Hispanic, the pseudo biological with black and white, and now, Islamophobia, now we're mixing in religion. And so how many things get, thrown together as we try to categorize people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that intersectionality. There are so many examples. It's Mary. So for me, when I started reading the book, I also want to say one more thing: how I got to know this author. So I was watching the 5-part series called Asian Americans. It's a documentary on PBS. So if anybody has not seen it yet, I would definitely recommend. If you are a PBS member, you can go online and see the 5 parts. Asian Americans, it talks about the Asian American history, culture, and everything. And in that, they have some experts who they interview. And one expert was Sharmila Sen. So when I heard her talk, I realized, oh, she has written a book. And then I went and got her book and started reading it. That's how I came across her work. And when I started reading, I realized that there were so many similarities, because she grew up in 1970s and 80s, and I grew up in 1970s and 80s in India. And all that she described, it just struck a chord. It was like, yes, I was just nodding my head throughout while reading the book. And so there was so much that I could identify with. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have something to say, because I come at this from the opposite side, having been born here and being that white person. I felt a certain amount of sadness when I read the parts where she'd say, we have to smile and joke. The fact that you have to put on a face and not be genuine surprised me. I felt badly that my people, Americans or white Americans, do that. And of course, the last 2 years has been a real awakening for me all the way around because of the George Floyd incident and all the rest of it. But yeah, I even to this day, when she talks about her kids being American and that she has to tell them that they're not white, I think that there's some sadness in that for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and many immigrants go through that, where they are trying to learn the culture and basically how to function in all kinds of situations as they come. And she came as a child, as a 12-year-old. So it was, in fact, Rijuta Tai, you sent a question. I would love to read the question, because I think it really talks to it. So do you want to say it? You can say the question.
No, that's okay. You can read it.
So the question.
I missed some of your talks because my computer just went off or something. So I missed the first part, what you were discussing.
Yeah, so I gave a summary of the book, but you have already read the book.
Yeah.
So fine. So the question that this is Mrs. Rujuta Patre, and she said, I really enjoyed the book. It was amazing how I could relate to the experiences of the author, as I also came to America in 1970. What was surprising is that the author was a child and I was a young bride and a grown woman. Yet our emotions were the same. How did the author come to realize that her trying to assimilate by adapting American way of living doesn't make you American? Was it a slow realization or more like an aha moment? So that's a very good question. And anybody wants to talk to that?
Kylie, I want to ask
Yes.
Rijita ji if what her experience was. I would like to learn was it the aha moment or was it more like a gradual learning thing?
No,
for you?
but the thing is, when I came, I was new bride, and he was student. So our experiences were a little bit different than her, because she was a child going to school and all that. So we didn't have to deal with, you know, how to belong and be accepted by peers and those kind of things. So I think I did feel I didn't belong here, because everything was different that time. Right now, we have so many Indian shops, TV, and everything, that so we don't feel so much like it's so different. But when I came, there was not an Indian grocery shop, nothing to read, like books in Marathi, or so many things. So everything is like you just uprooted and just planted in some totally different environment. So for me, it was very hard to adjust to that. But I think I didn't feel the need that she felt to assimilate. So you have to adapt everything, like food, clothes, language, learn to speak the way pronunciations are here. All those things were not a part of my experience. So I kind of felt we just met people through university, and those people were pretty much open-minded and educated, and so I didn't experience so much discrimination, but there were some. And I kind of felt like we slowly adapted the different way of living, but it wasn't total transformation. It wasn't like we had to give up so much our typical Indian food, or not wear Indian clothes or anything like that. And then there was Indian associations and things like that, where we felt that, we belong to this community, and we, as the whole togetherness kind of sustain us in the total new environment. So it wasn't aha moment.
Yeah, so what you described right now is people who come here as adults, as young adults after age of 22, 23, where our identity is already formed, right? We have that
Yeah.
strong sense of identity
Yeah.
and culture by growing up in India. But
Yeah.
coming here in the middle of the childhood, like 10, 12
Yeah.
years of age, where they're still developing their identity, I think for author, that was a
Yeah.
point where she experienced all those. So yeah, very, very rightly pointed out. So anybody else wants to share? I can ask another question that I was planning to ask the author, but we can also talk about it. Anybody else who has read the book wants to share their thoughts, just first reactions?
Hi, this is Tanvi. I also thought, as I came to this country, also very young, it's a very, very similar experience. I enjoyed the book because it talks so much about also how our culture has put our people in different boxes as well, whether you wear the red taga in our wrist, or our caste, or how you eat, what you eat, are you vegetarian, what caste, but yet there is no talk about race, which I have a little bit of in India we do talk a lot about race. We do talk about our dark complexion. Look at our, matrimonial columns and how we marry. And, even now you see that. But I did enjoy the fact that she brought up all these, it was very nostalgic, honestly, to because she had also little Bengali words in it.
Yeah.
That I've heard my parents use often, as to how we describe a certain kind of a group of people. So it was good. My question probably would be how it was for her parents to deal with the book, what they thought when she thought she was going to write it, and her interaction with the last generation. and about her experience and that sort. So.
Yeah, that's a good question. Though whatever she described looked like it did not criticize so much as state facts, and it was non-judgmental actually. Now that you
Right.
mention it, yeah. Uh,
Right.
so one question I had for her was, so when she came at like in 1982. Before she came, she had limited exposure to American culture, language, food, music, whatever. So she came here and started cold turkey, sort of, suddenly put into this new culture. But youngsters who come today, whether they are young children or college students or young people who come to work here, now in India, they are already exposed to so many of these American elements, right? So they might already come fluent in American lingo. Some may even have the accent already. They grow up watching American TV shows, movies, listening to American music, and so on. So, and also when they come here, they are in close contact with their family back home through cell phones and all this social media. So the way they experience this immigration is different than what people who came here in the 80s, even 90s. It's totally different. So my question to her was that, do you think this invisible cloak of whiteness that we are talking about, it has already reached far off places like India, where people continue to dream about coming to US and, having a part of that, American pie. So that was one of the questions. What do you think, or anybody has any ideas about that? Like how two generations differ? And I'm sure people who have been here for many years, like Ramgada uncle, you came here at that time, and compared to that now, when people come here, I'm sure we notice the difference in everything that we experience. You're muted, uncle.
Okay, I came in 60s, and at that time we did not have much information of TV or computer or anything. Only we went to UC's library in Bombay to get the information about US, or maybe we have seen in some movies, American movies or something. But anyway, at that time, our mindset was to learn something new, and what we had come as a student, learn and succeed. At the same time, people in Minnesota were so friendly, white, and all the information we had, even in the buses, in the in the Minneapolis buses, there was a big board advertisement, welcome the immigrants, the ambassadors. So, and at that time, our feeling as a student from India, to become an Indian ambassador. So when you communicate with the American people, you like to share your culture and your system and so on and so forth. At the same time, I agree, many Americans did not have much knowledge about India. So it was also a good idea to share with them. As far as the discrimination concerned, I have never experienced any discrimination. Throughout my dealing as a student, as an employee of a company, and when I started my own company for 30 years, I ran, did not have much experience. I used to get the job, I did not have to advertise. So, but at the same time, I saw the discrimination against the Black people, against the Native Americans and something like that. But I learned from the American families a lot. I had a farmer family, so I used to go to their farm and used to know all about their, what you call rural area, American rural area, and how they went through in 1900s and 1930s. So you can, I think the whole thing is a mindset when you come as an immigrant, how you want to adjust in this life.
Yeah, yeah. And then at that time, there were fewer people who were coming here from India, right? And right now, there's this flood of people who come here.
Oh, there is no doubt about that. But at the same time, as you mentioned already, the people who are coming or students who are coming, they know a lot about America through TV, internet, books, all about. As a matter of it, they can look it up on the TV when the students are coming at the U. They can look at the apartment where they are going to go and so on and so forth. They rent from India. When we came, I think most of the earlier people have experienced, to call India, it was a $2.50 dollars per minute. So we rarely call. And our aerogram, if you have all known, I think many of the younger people have forgotten about the aerogram. Well, aerogram was our communication center with India.
Yeah.
I think following up on what Ram just said is that I imagine the experience is different for depending on which part of the country you come to. Tanvi, you were in New York, I think, and
Right.
Srini, you've been all over the country, and when I go to the East Coast, I have a different experience than when I go to the West Coast, with friendliness and all of the rest of that.
Yeah. Just like, people who come from India are so diverse that you cannot just say, if you meet 5 Indians here, you cannot say everything about their culture, because every Indian is going to be different depending on what part of country they come from. Within that, there are so many nuances. Same thing here, depending on which part of the country you immigrate to, it is going to be a different experience.
Talking about the different experience, I'm sure you must have heard about IAM's oral history project with Minnesota Historical Society. There are early Indians who came in Minnesota in 60s and 50s. Their stories are listed, at least the 15 stories, and then their children's story, and then many organizations. So if you are interested to read about the experiences of different Indians coming at a different time, it's very interesting study. And from that study, one person of Indian origin did the PhD thesis, comparing the early Indians and their children who grew up in America. It's completely 2 different culture. And she wrote the thesis. And we as Godan Namudripad and myself act as an advisor to her. We have gone through these oral history projects, and they are all available at Minnesota Historical Society Library.
Yeah, that's good to know. So if anybody is interested, they can go and look at it.
Yeah, that's a great call out, IAM Oral History Project. Yeah.
I agree, Ram. As a student, and because I came into New York, I've never actually experienced much racism in this country, I have to say. And I think the book is more not about accepting American culture. It is about accepting the whiteness of the American culture, whether you're learning the culture through lots of white things, which is soap operas, as she talks about, right? But yeah, I always think it is a teachable moment for all of us to get to know people, share our history, learn theirs, get to eat at their homes or their restaurants, and vice versa. And so yeah, the American way currently is not, I don't feel it's the white way. Kids that are coming from India know not just the white culture of America, but also the Black contemporary culture of America at the same time. So I think it's important to point that out. America has recently become not just a white American culture, but it is a very, it's intertwined in many ways. If you look at all our, TV shows or movies. So there's a way to assimilate yourself in that culture, be proud of your own, and make sure that it is a teachable moment for everyone that we meet, get to know each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we can, I don't want to say erase the whiteness of the culture, but the dominance of the whiteness in the American culture, if that makes any sense. But
yeah, one critique of that though is that even anybody who comes from another culture or another country, we know this place from the media or from these social popular cultural perspective. But in her book, she gives a lot of historical details, which helps us put into perspective what it means or what it meant to be an immigrant. So she talks about 1830s, where Indians came to this country. So there were Asian Indian immigrants in 1830s in America. Then she compares it to 1980s and then today. So if you have the book, page 74, 75, she writes, white collar, graduate school educated Indian STEM professionals who have immigrated to the US since 1990s see themselves, these are us, most of us, unrelated to the contemporary coolies of another era. So contemporary coolies of another era are those who came around 1830s or, you know, between then and 1900s, who worked as manual laborers. And they were, we all know the term coolie, and we know the historical background as it was used by Britishers in India. So that's what she's referring to. So she talks about this difference between immigrants who celebrate arrival and immigrants who celebrate emancipation. Okay, so we belong to the arrival group and African Americans belong to the emancipation group. They celebrate their emancipation, which today actually marks a great day for that, being Juneteenth. And we generally celebrate our arrival here as immigrants. And so she compares those conditions, and so we have to be very careful. We cannot talk about people of color as one group, because as you can see, there's so much diversity and differences in their experiences. So the question that I was going to ask her was, you know, as first generation immigrants, and I don't know if you all know that 75% of Asian Indians here in Minnesota are first generation, okay? So which most of us are. And so when we come here, we are almost ignorant of the racial history and race relations in America. So what we know, we have never learned the American history as our kids are learning here in schools. So what does the history of immigration of these various people of color teach us about being American, right? As she talks about, and she talks mainly about being American. When we are saying we become American, we are saying we become white, we become fluent in the white culture, or we know how to function in the white system, sort of. That's what she's describing. So any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I haven't read her book, but at the same time, immigrant experience, we have learned the history, as you mentioned, about 1830s. Those mind conditions were different. And when they started coming in 50s and 60s, we came as a student or professors or teachers and so on and so forth. The completely mindset between these two generations were much, much different.
Right.
At the same time, I think I would like to invite Jaravar Mystery. Jaravar has done lots of plays and so on and so forth. Jaravar, you have any comment?
I was hoping to attend as a listener. The thing that I will say is that I too, like Sharmila, came in 1984. A lot of things were recognizable. For those of you who don't know, I'm a theater actor, writer, performer here in St. Paul, and I'm a Parsi originally from India. My mother's family is from Sikandrabad, my father's family is from Mumbai. And in my work, I explore these themes quite a bit about belonging, immigration, assimilation, you know, being in the theater, those kinds of things. So, and also as an undergraduate here, I came here to go to college. I did study a lot of political theory, economic theory, and so I had some background in, you know, learning about race and discovering my own complexities related to it, being from a minority within India, but also from that educated, you know, somewhat privileged class. So Yeah, I tend to explore many of these themes in my work, and that's partly also why I was interested in attending today's conversation. And one of the things that I've tried to do is share that complexity. That it's okay to be, to have many different sides of you, and to have different experiences, and the complexities of being. For me personally, what those are like, being Parsi, being coming as a fairly young man, living most of my adult life here in the U.S. My wife is white. My child is biracial, but I'm also, very connected to India. I go all over Minnesota telling children's stories from India. So, stuff from the Panchatantra, and some of you have seen me do, Akbar and Birbal and those kinds of things. So, yeah, I like to embrace the multiplicities of identity and that are within me, and I like to share that that's okay. I'm the descendant of refugees who came from Iran to India in the 10th century. So I like to share the long arc of history, the way that people have moved from continent to continent over generations, and that movement continues. So yeah, I love this conversation. I'm very I get excited by these themes, and also recognizing our own responsibility towards some of the injustices and things that we may participate in without even realizing it. So so I'm very happy to be here, and I'm enjoying listening to all of you.
Thank you, Zarawar, for sharing your story. Of course, I know the wonderful work you do. And for those who want to check it out, the name is Dreamland Arts Theatre, right? And there are wonderful performances, and of course, sharing of the cultural piece, music, theater, storytelling, definitely. So thank you for sharing your story.
Is any book on the horizon from him?
I mostly do theater, so it would typically be a live performance. So right now, because of COVID, our theater is closed, and we're doing some programming on Zoom. But yeah, when things open up again, I hope to share more work with everybody through live theater.
Yeah, so Zarawar, if you can please share the program information with IAM, we would be happy to put it in our newsletter so that people who are interested can also watch it.
I will do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zarawar. Also, another book I like to mention about, which was published in 2019, From 7 Rivers to 10,000 Lakes by Preeti Mathur, which gives the history of immigrants in Minnesota. Not only Minnesota, she goes back to all the way to 1830 and so on and so forth. But exactly, she gives the history from Minnesota from 1900. And what Indians as an immigrants have done, the contribution to Minnesota or indirectly to USA, which is people like Mr. Zarawar Mystery and many cultural organizations and IAM and so on and so forth, religious organizations. So I think we are part of this larger, even though white dominated community, but we are making our marks, and then we are contributing to the society because we are all together in this. And white people are realizing, so I think our mission is to more and more spreading understanding people.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book that Ram Uncle just mentioned, it talks about the history of Asian Indians in Minnesota. So if anybody is interested in that, that's another good resource. One more question I would love to put out for those who read the book is she talks about, growing up she actually kept notes and she called them field guide of how we learn the white ways. Okay, so she gave some examples like, and we've all done. So she calls it going native. And as we mentioned in the beginning, she grew up here as an adolescent, as a teenager, as a young adult. So she was developing her identity. And so naturally, she's trying to fit in with her friends, her school, the society in general. So she talks about some examples, which I think we all can identify with. Some examples like, for example, a very white cultural thing is writing thank you notes, okay? Or when somebody says thank you, what is the proper response? Using your indoor voice. The importance of giving tips when you use certain services like food or haircut or whatever it is. Using silverware properly. Getting into queues when you're waiting your turn at certain places. And so all these examples, the way she describes is, it's like, yes, we had to learn that, right? Because that's how things are done here. So what did you think when you were reading about that? And she says, this is how kids, because our kids are born here and being brought up here, right? So our kids are natives, remember, but we are immigrants, first generation immigrants. And what we want is, we want to give our kids those bicultural values, like our values from back home, as well as they have to learn how to function in the American society. So there's a balance that we have to strike. So that was another question I wanted to ask her. What would she say now that she's a parent? How does she manage balancing that, teaching the kids that, you don't have to have the white ways, but you can strike a balance where you're doing both the things, something from your culture, as well as making sure that you're doing the right thing, that you are tipping people who are, giving you services, or you're saying thank you properly, and so on and so forth. So any comments on that? And I'm sure just in like my household, every household has these conversations with their teens, right? When they call out something and you say, no, I didn't mean that, and your child goes, no, but that's not how you talk, mom or dad. So I'm sure you all have those examples.
Yeah, I think when our kids are growing up, we are growing up with them too, because we learn a lot of new things that we didn't know before, and their perspective. And so many times we think certain ways and they take it different ways. And in India, we just take everything for granted. We don't think we need to express every feeling. We hardly say I love you to people. And here, kids kind of want that, to hear that I love you. And we kind of just like, well, I do. Why do I have to say it 1,000 times? But those subtle differences, I think we learn as kids are growing up and as they go to school. My daughter, when she came home with her friends, then she would say, Mom, don't talk so loud. They think you are fighting. Because in our language, when you're talking loud, it sounds like fighting. And I never realized that anybody could interpret it as a fighting. And so little things like that, day-to-day life, we are also growing up, and our experience is also enriching. And I think that's how we learn a lot of ways, and we have to keep open mind to accept different ways of doing things. Yes. I think so many times if we are so rigid and we don't want to change any little thing, then there is going to be a friction. But if you are open and if you accept different things and different ways of doing things and just go with the flow, then I think it's easy.
Yeah, and that example is so true, like especially when we're talking on the phone. I think many of us do that, right? If I'm talking on phone to India, to my mom or sisters or anybody, I am so excited. I'm talking so loudly that my child will come up from upstairs and down from upstairs, and he'll say, Mom, are you fighting? I'm like, no, I'm excited. I'm happy to talk to my mom. And he's like, can you talk like, little quietly? loud. And that happens all the time. So our way of expressing ourselves is different, and that's totally a cultural thing, and we have to catch ourselves sometimes. I would love to hear from anybody who has grown up here, just like Sharmila. And I see a couple of people on the call. I don't know if I should call you out, but Ritu, we would love to hear from you since you grew up here. If you have any thoughts about this.
I'm here. How are you guys?
Good, good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, I'm just listening. Yeah, I've been here since what, 1976. I agree with everything, but a part of what you guys are experiencing that I never did is like my parents never knew to write thank you notes. Like I didn't even know that as a kid. You know, those little things that I had to learn that like you parents are doing for your kids, which is very different. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just processing everything that you guys are talking about. I think it's a lot easier for your guys' kids now or my kids because there's a generation already ahead of them that's been here for, 30, 40 years who already understands the entire culture. So it's a lot easier, I think, for these kids, like my kids, your kids, to process all of this because they have a generation of parents who already understand everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Definitely there's this, they grow up with a sense of security on one hand because they know the culture, but on the other hand, they have these parents who came from a totally different culture. So this feeling, and I think she mentions it, or I have heard this before as well, that for immigrant parents, and as Rijita, you pointed out, we actually grow up with our kids, right? So when my kids started kindergarten, I came to know what it means to be kindergarten in US because I didn't know what that meant, and so on and so forth. So we are learning with them, and we might not be able to get the full experience that they are getting, and their world might be totally different than our world.
Yeah, I didn't even know any nursery rhyme when they were growing up. And so I have to actually buy the books and learn because we didn't grow up hearing those nursery rhymes.
Right.
Let me share another aspect of parenthood. As I said, I did not face discrimination or racial remarks. For my child, when Lisa growing up in the neighborhood with the white kids, she felt that. And the solution we found was participation with the neighbors. My wife participated with the activities and so on and so forth. But another thing at the school, my wife started participating in their activities, helping the school children and so on and so forth. So when these other kids see that this Lisa's mom is coming and just like anybody else, they are participating on all those things. So we as an immigrant has to learn is to participate in school programs and other various activities, which many of us don't do.
Yes.
Well, I think too for
we have to show up.
With Lisa too. I mean, I'm right around her age, so I've known her since I was a kid. I was embarrassed to be Indian. I hid it. I didn't show it. I asked my mom and dad not to show up to things. I mean, I was very embarrassed. But today's kids, not at all. They love it. They love showing off their mehendi and their this and that and whatever for International Day. There's an entire Diwali function now, and so it's very different from what you experience today. But my generation, we were embarrassed. We were very embarrassed and tried to hide it as much as possible.
Let me share another one. You were talking, Saili, the learning from American culture. And you already mentioned other things. So let me mention one more thing, particularly we Indians. We are not punctual at the meetings on time. And that's very, very bad. I mean, we would be going, if we had a job interview of the wedding or somebody's American side, we will be on time. But if we have Indian functions, we don't arrive at time or so on and so forth. The other habit you described was talking loud is one thing, but interpreting, if somebody else is talking, we jump into it, rather than waiting for a turn.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So there are so many.
Some of the things we have to learn, the common courtesies and the value of the time of other people.
Yeah, and there are a few other people on the call who haven't said anything yet. Anybody else would like to share? Rajiv Tandon, I know you teach, so do you have any comments or anything?
We came here with some differences. First of all, I was married. We were married when we came here, and we both came as students. So our experience was very different because after the school day, we were together. We didn't have to worry about what was happening. More importantly, at the university, the atmosphere was very different. And immediately afterwards, I got into corporate America, and there was no discrimination except as part of my job when I had to travel to the south, to the deep south. That's the first time I ever experienced discrimination when in a restaurant they refused to serve me because I wasn't white. Only experience I've had in all these years, 55 years, that I would even call that as discrimination. One thing is, immediately everybody wanted to start by saying, what do you go by, Raj? And I insisted my name was Rajiv, and everybody understood that and they would comply. And I've noticed part of it is many of us try to change our name to suit people's ability to say it. I've never had that problem, and we taught that to our kids, and they have never had any problem, even though their names are different. And I found that people generally are very accommodating in terms of what your preferences are. So I've had a great experience in this country, and really adapting to the, first of all, we were very young when we came here. So adapting to the culture was not hard at all. But some of those things that you said that we brought because we were still adults when we got here are still with you.
Yeah. So as I said, we are all first generation, but then again, the circumstances under which we came is different for each person. And in her book, she talks about her own experience that they came to this country when her father lost her job, and they came to this country and he found work. And so it was a very humble beginning. And they got support from friends and relatives and things like that. So
one of the things that, if I can add, was very beneficial is literally within the first 2 weeks of coming to this country, because we were a married couple, we got a job as resident counselors of an international house. So half the students were American and half of them were both men and women were American, and the other half were international students. So being in a culture where you were trying to assimilate, you're trying to learn in a setting which was very conducive to give and take. The American kids would be teaching the cultures and mores of this country and trying to learn from other cultures. So that made our experience extremely different.
Yeah. So anybody else has any thing to say, Srini? Or anybody who hasn't said anything?
Hi, I can say something. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Faham.
Thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to say something as someone who's grown up here. My parents immigrated here about 30 years ago, and both of them went to grad school in the Midwest. So I can say that I'm really fortunate that my parents are my friends and I can talk to them about a lot of these things. And to the point that like our generation is taking a lot more pride in their cultures, and that yoga and Mehndi are some things that are certain concepts that are more mainstream. I do agree with that. At the same time, I just wanted to add that even me as a child of immigrants and my own parents, we've faced a lot of microaggressions in Minnesota and other places. And I don't know if this is just our family or a lot of other families, but we try to overlook those microaggressions, mainly because the model minority myth. We don't want to face the confrontation that comes with those microaggressions or full-on macroaggressions. So it's a unique experience growing up here because you face both sides of that equation.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Sahana. And thank you for giving us that perspective of the younger generation. You mentioned microaggressions. So it has been found that microaggressions have always been there. In fact, macroaggressions have been there. But now today's generation can identify that, can identify those when they happen. Whereas people who don't have that perspective might not identify that something just happened was a microaggression, and they might think that, oh, maybe I didn't know how to do this and that's why I was getting these remarks. So you rightly pointed out, we didn't know that these were microaggression or these were racist remarks or whatever it was happening. And as an immigrant, the idea was, the goal was to adapt oneself so that we can function and work in the society or, you know, carry on our lives. So yeah, so, and now that more awareness is happening, we are able to name those things. Like, you know, when somebody doesn't say our name properly, we can say, you know, by the way, this is how I say my name, or this is how it is pronounced. Or, you know, if you don't think that something that was said was made you feel comfortable, you can tell that. And so there's more awareness. So let's end with what she says at the end of the book. And she says, I did not become American when I started speaking with the right accent, or by dancing to the popular American music, or eating American food. Those acts merely Americanized me. And just to be Americanized is not to be American. So she said, even when I passed my naturalization exam and renounced my Indian citizenship, even then I did not actually become an American. She said, I became American by not becoming white, and which she said was a later thing. So after many years, when she realized that instead of trying to be white, I can be myself and try to, you know, imbibe that of both the cultures. So I thought that was really something thought-provoking that we all definitely are thinking about after reading this book. So since it's noon, let's stop here. I am sorry, I don't know. I'm going to connect with her and find out why she couldn't join us today, the author. But even though she was not here, I think we had quite a fruitful discussion, and I'm so very grateful for each one of you who joined us and expressed themselves and started this conversation. I think we have started a conversation which needs to go on. Yes.
Yeah, awesome, Sally. Just one couple quick comments. Yes, thank you for organizing the event and bringing us together. It's, you know, we are not used to having these kind of, I guess, probing and conversations on somewhat difficult topics. So appreciate you bringing us together and creating an environment where we, you know, we feel it's safe to open up and, you know, talk about these things. Just one quick comment, right? So just building on the topic of learning and microaggression and such, last year after the George Floyd murder, a lot of us, for sure, like when I look at myself, right, learned about the history of civil rights and everything that happened in terms of opening the doors for us. A lot of stuff that was in place that personally I could take advantage of and excel here. So conversations like this will take us back and help unearth and learn everything that was invested by the civil rights leaders, the African American community struggles, Native American community struggles that paved the way for us to succeed. So thank you.
So Sally, I want to just add one 30-second note. I'm with Srini. I had the similar experience since last year because I had preconceived notion about people, color. And when I see a black person in office versus a black person on the street, I had different views. So that changed, you know, to even think differently has changed since last year, only last year. I'm not going to say I was like this forever. So last year, as And I think we all need to really have some kind of self-realization to even start learning and talk about these things.
Yes, and that is one of our goal is to educate our community so that there's more awareness. And so we will definitely try and bring more educational programming and events, and continue to check our website for more resources. We have an racial justice page on the IM website where you can find resources, events, and so on and so forth. Again, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to stop the recording now.